Rabotai, we are continuing on Shulchan Aruch Archaim, Hilchot Tefillah, Siman Sadi Hey, really going to Sadi Vav. We have one little piece, the last seif of Siman Sadi Hey left, which is really a din brought in Trumat edition, one of the later Rishonim that Beit Yosef brings, Maran, and that is that not only for Tefillah you have to have your legs fit together and put together, Ragleim, Regel Yeshara, Kaf, this kaf ragleim kekaf regel egel. So pasuk says that the malachim that we try to simulate ourselves to them is ragleim regel yeshara. It looks like 1 foot. So therefore we put our feet together in tefillah. But not only there we try to simulate what malachim do, but by kedusha also v'kara zeh l'zeh ve'amar. Right? That also is simulation of what Malachim do, saying Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh in front of Hashem. So because that also is a simulation of Malachim, says the Trumat Hadeshen and Paskins the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tzadi Hey Sif Dalet, Tov lechaver raglav gam b'sha'a she'omer kedusha im shliach tzibur. It's proper to also have your feet together by the time that you say kedusha, and this is more of a lechatchila. Again, this is not as important necessarily as the other one. The other one is clearly mentioned, the Gemara in Masechet Brachot Daf Yud Amud Bet, as we mentioned, by Tefillah. But this is an addition that Trumat Hadeshen says, well, once you're at it, by Kedusha also, we are simulating what the Malachim do. So therefore, Shulchan Aruch says, Tov, it's good to do that. It's a proper conduct to be in Mechaver Raglav, B'sha'a she'omer Kedusha im shliach tzibur as well. And with that, we're going to start Siman Sadi Vav in Shulchan Aruch, and that is starting halacha from a Masechet Brachot also, Daf Chav Gimel Amud Bet. The Gemara there describes how a person that stands in davening should not be holding things that disturb him. Imagine if you have a very expensive crystal in your hand and you want to daven, so subconsciously or consciously your mind is busy not dropping the crystal and breaking it, right? If you have a cup full of juice or water for that matter, or something that may spill and dirty things and may spill on you, well, again, your mind is on what you're holding, and subconsciously your kavanah is disturbed with that. So hence, says Maran Shulchan Aruch, Keshehu mitpalel lo yechos biyado tefillin. You should not be holding a tefillin. Tefillin drops, as v'shalom. You're going to be very careful not to drop it. So even though they say, what's the big deal? Well, it is, because subconsciously your mind is on safeguarding the tefillin that it shouldn't drop. And same would be with lo sefer mikidvei HaKodesh. You should not be holding a sefer Torah in your hand while you daven Shemona Esrei, or any other sefer misifrei HaKodesh. Now we're going to speak about Sidur in just a moment. Velo ka'ara mele'ah, not a full bowl of any content. Velo sakin, not a knife, right? Because again, it could endanger if he falls. It could be dangerous and could also get ruined. Umaot ve'kikar, same is with money. Holding money in your hand or holding a loaf of bread. Because your heart is on them. Shelo yipelu, you are focused, though being subconsciously, shelo yipelu, that they should not fall from your hand. Ve'itared ve'itpadel kavanato. Therefore, your tarud, you're going to be busy in your mind, and that would negate from your kavanah. And lulav bizmano, says the Shulchan Aruch, if you're on Chag HaSukkot and you love the mitzvot, like the Gemara says in Masechet Sukkah, that the Hasidim would walk around with the lulav and etrog the entire day. Start in the morning and the whole day, they're holding this like a baby in their hand and going around going around and about their regular day and chores. So if you want to daven with lulav and etrog in your hand, you want to daven Shemona Esrei, we don't want to put them down. Every moment is a mitzvah, so to speak. Even though that really, for the first second you take it, you've done your obligation, but in a chavivut ha-mitzvah, so says the Shulchan Aruch, mutar lechos biyad, kevan she'achiza biyado hi mitzvah eno nitrad bishvilo. Because it's a mitzvah to hold it, you have so much chavivut there, you're not going to be distracted by that. Now, says the Mishnah Berura, we have to speak, when we do the next if we're going to speak about cell phones, sidurim, and so on and so forth. But first, Keshehu mitpalel, says the Mishnah Berura, B'primigadim katav duadin b'shat kriyat shema u'psikei zimra. It's not just Shemona Esrei. Primigadim says, any tefillah that you need proper intent and proper kavanah, certainly in Shema, that we spoke about the whole Siman, about the kavanah of Kriyat Shema and how it's me'akev and so on. So says the Primigadim, same is with Kriyat Shema. And not only that, same is with Psukei Zimra, you have to have kavanah as well. Right? We mentioned before in the name of the Poskim, the Araba, others, that Psukei Zimra comes from language of lezamer. Lezamer means to weed out, right? And that is because you uproot the kochot hatum'ah, the negative forces, and you flatten and pave the way for an acceptable tefillah in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You start the tefillah with praises of Hashem, connecting with Him in such a loving way, right? And that's why you need to connect. And connection does not happen without kavanah. So therefore, says the Pri Megadim, there also you have to be careful. Lo ye'echoz ubedievet in sarech lachzor beh. How about if you did hold a knife or a Sefer Torah or any of the things that are prohibited, you should not have held them in your hand, but you did. So what's the halacha now? You have to go back and daven again? Says the Mishnah Berura, no. You don't have to go back with the Eved. En sarich lachazor ulitpalel. Unless you know that you were so busy guarding this thing in your hand that you didn't have kavanah at all, even in avot, even in the first 3 brachot. Now, if a person does not have kavanah in avot, that is ma'akiv. The first 3 brachot of Shemona Esrei is so important that if you didn't have kavanah, you have to go back and daven again. Nowadays, says Chacham Obadia, it's very difficult, because who says that when you go back next time and you daven, you're going to have kavanah? But if the only reason that your kavanah was disturbed is because you were holding something, but you otherwise daven with kavanah, you will have to go back and daven again. So says, Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, by the way, says that this is not just holding something in your hand. But if you're holding, let's say, a pamphlet or a sefer under your arm, right? So you have to be careful that this doesn't fall. That also, he says the same thing. Sometimes to me it seems that it would be even worse, right? Because every movement could loosen it and it could fall. So that certainly will be a problem as well. But of course, the minhag of the Ashkenazim is they hold the Sefer Torah when they say Yakum Purkan, or you hold the Sefer Torah when you say Kol Nidrei, right? You say certain things when you're holding the Sefer Torah. That's mutar, because kevan shekavarato az leitpalel al lomdei Torah, when it says the Mishnah Berura, by Yakum Purkan, you're davening for Lomdei Torah, and Sefer, holding up a Sefer Torah is for that purpose of davening for Lomdei Torah, and again for Kol Nidrei also is the respect of the Sefer Torah. You're asking, it's a beautiful piece of Maran Chida in Moreh Be'etzbah, how you hold the Sefer Torah in Leil Yom Kippur, and you ask for Mechila from disrespecting Torah, not having learned it properly, not having done it properly. It's a beautiful thing to start the Yom Kippur with those thoughts. It's so fantastic and so beautiful. But nevertheless, those are for the need of the Torah itself. It's like mitzvah bizmano. It's like a lulav in its time, right? It's davar beito matov. V'chen mutar lachzik b'sha'a shevarachim hachodesh. So of course, Ashkenazim also hold the Sefer Torah when they say Birkat HaChodesh. By us, we put our hand on the Sefer Torah. The Sefer Torah stands by itself because we have it in a case. So we put our hands on it. The Chazam puts his hand when he says Misha Barach for the Tzibur, and so on and so forth, because those are connections that we have with the Torah, and you don't have to necessarily hold the Sefer Torah in your hand. Okay, so that's amazing. Velo Sefer, you cannot hold a sefer. It's not just the sefer Torah, says the Chafetz Chaim, but even the sefarim that we have, you should not be holding a sefer in your hand while davening. That's not the proper conduct, because your mind is on the fact that you're holding a sefer Torah. It's annoying. Don't fall. Don't drop it, and so on and so forth. And it's a incorrect conduct for tefillah. For a full pot or bowl is the concern that it should not spill. For a knife is the concern that it should not fall on the ground and is going to, pierce your foot or someone else, or is going to get damaged. When you have money, you don't want them to drop and spread out. And even if they're in a bag or in a wallet, you should not be holding your wallet, because again, if it falls and then it gets lost or whatnot, and so on. Unless you're holding it in a way that there's no way that they're going to be falling or lost, then it will be mutar. V'katav bebirkei Yosef, Maran Chida writes in Birkei Yosef, Dehu adin de'asur le'oshiv tinok lefanav b'shat tefillah. You can't sit a baby in front of you in shat tefillah. Now, this is very important, because many people, I think once I have the mic, I could say this. When Rosh Hashanah says once you have the shofar, you could blow more. So this needs to be mentioned to people. People think that it's a mitzvah to bring children to the Beit Knesset. Yes, correct. If the child understands what's happening, and on top of it, it's not a disturbing factor to the shul. If you're disturbing other people in the shul, is an avera, absolutely, to bring a child to the Beit Knesset. It's not the right conduct. And also, in the chinuch aspect of things, it's absolutely the wrong chinuch. The absolutely wrong chinuch to bring a child of 2, 3, 4 years old, even 5. It depends on how smart and how composed they are. And I'll tell you, it's very simple why. Because you bring a child and you teach them that the shul is a place to run and to yell and to eat candy, and gam ki yaskin lo yasur mimenu, like the pasuk says, chanoch na'ar al pi darko, gam ki yaskin lo yasur mimenu. You bring a child and they learn to not have awe and reverence of the Beit Knesset. How in the world are you going to give them a chinuch later on that the shul is a place that you don't talk? The shul is a place that you don't run around. You have respect for the shul. You have kavod. You come here to daven. You come here to learn. You come here to be involved in avodat Hashem. You know how you do it? You do it by restricting their entrance to the shul. And when they want, they say, when you grow up, you're going to come to shul. When you could daven to Hashem, you're going to come to shul. And they look forward for that. They look up to people who go to shul. And then when they are almost ready, you tell them, okay, here's the game plan. You come there, we don't talk in the shul, right? We don't say things that are not proper in the shul. We come to learn. If you could come for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sit next to Abba, learn, and then go to the play group, then the shuls that are blessed to have the children's program and play groups, that's where the kids should be. If there is a program for the kids that we're starting, B'ezrat Hashem, of someone dealing with them, giving them tickets, encouraging them to do tefillah properly, and they are mature enough to be able to do that, so that's what it should be. But to just bring a child in the shul that's running around and yelling and disturbing other people's kavanah, it's not just ben adam lechavero and ben adam lemakom for you, because you're hurting other people's thing. Madam Makom is because you are causing disrespect to the shul. But it's also a counterintuitive thing for the kid. You won't have a chance again to reset their mindset of what shul is all about, because you already have brought them. They subconsciously know that you brought them knowing that they're going to be running around and yelling. So that's the chinuch you gave them. And you can't undo that chinuch later on. It's going to be very, very difficult. So that's my 2 cents about the structure of shuls and children. But halachically speaking, says the Chafetz Chaim, You can't put the kid in front of you b'shat tefillah because it's going to be a disturbance, right? Now, this is Maran Chida saying it, and the Mordechai Eliyahu added to this that certainly you can't hold the little kid in your hand while davening, right? That's not just disturbance that you don't want to drop them. It's also they're going to start, taking your yarmulke off and pulling your glasses and scratching you and talking to you and needing your attention and trying to get the attention. And it's going to be difficult to daven like that. That's not a proper. But now, how about if your kid's crying? You could be at home, you could be at shul, whatever scenario it may be, the kid is crying. So you can't just ignore the cry of a kid because you're davening. And it's not going to be productive either, because the more you ignore it, the louder it becomes, right?
Even during Amidah?
We're talking about the Amidah. So what happens when your kid is crying, and the fact that the kid is crying is bothering you and bothering everybody else, and the fact that it's bothering everybody else, it bothers you even more. So what do you do then? So it says Mordechai Eliyahu, you could pick him up and calm him down and daven like that. If that's the only way, then that's the better of two evils, so to speak. And that's what you're going to be doing. That's what Or Letzion writes as well. So that will be the halacha. Again, Chacham and Averosho, technical success is, don't set yourself up for failure, right? Don't set yourself up for a scenario like that. If you have, kids program and so on and so forth, set yourself up for success. But if you find yourself in that scenario, of course, says the Or Letzion, says Mordechai Eliyahu, you could pick the kid up and calm them down. I would say a person should pause the tefillah. You're not mumbling the words of the tefillah. As you do that, you stop. You remember where you're holding, you stop, you pick them up, you calm them down, and without talking, and when they're calm and composed and they're ready, then you continue your tefillah again. Of course, given the parameters that we mentioned before, that it's not enough time lapse and so on and so forth that we discussed already.
You go to the beginning of the Amidah?
No, you pause there. Again, if the pause was a short pause, a few seconds, then you certainly, according to everyone, you continue from where you stopped. And again, we discussed this in previous shurim. What if your pause was longer than the whole time that it would take you to daven? In other words, let's say it takes you 7 minutes to daven Shemona Esrei. If your pause was longer than 7 minutes, that's something that we have discussed the details of it in the previous shurim. So,
what about putting the kid in a different place? Can you move out of your stance and put him in a different domain and then come back?
In the tefillah, you're saying?
Yeah.
Again, if that's something that could enhance your kavanah, and holding them in your hand is not going to really help, yeah, you basically go. It's like that we had this scenario for a person that has a child that has a dirty diaper because bad smell, so you have to move from there or move them from there and come back. So that's yes, if that's the of course without talking, of course without this, you stop, you take care of the issue and you come back. So says Mishna Berura, ma'ot v'kikar v'davka hani she'im yiplu yesh b'hem hefsed, right? There are certain things that if they drop, if they fall, nothing happens. It doesn't damage you, it doesn't damage it. So then those things are not necessarily asur. ויש אומרים דהני לאו דווקא, אלא אורחד מלתנקת, והוא הדין שאין ליטול שום דבר בידו בשעת תפילה, וכן הסכים מתז. And there are those who argue, say no, nothing you can hold in your hands in the time of tefillah. The Taz's shita is that anything that you hold, even if it's something that if it would fall, nothing would happen to it, still is getting a few megabytes of your attention, or kilobytes of your attention. So therefore, you don't want to daven like that. Have nothing in your hands. Now, we're going to talk about Sidur in the next Seif, right? But nothing that's not a necessity for your tefillah should be in your hand. And guess who agrees with this? The Kaf HaChaim. Kaf HaChaim Paskins like the Taz, that you should hold nothing in your hand in the time of tefillah. So, if you're not planning to daven from a Sidur, don't hold a Sidur in your hand. You're not planning to use it. put it next to you, that if it needs be, then you'll pick it up. Then you'll hold it. Or you're holding a candy for your kid to give them after tefillah if they're quiet during the tefillah. You show them the candy, the goods beforehand, and they're supposed to be quiet. And you don't hold the candy and you put it in your pocket. Don't hold it, even though that if it falls. Well, if it falls, it will disappear. But nothing is going to happen necessarily to it. It's not a catastrophe if it falls down. But nevertheless, Kaf HaChaim would say, don't keep it in your hand. Don't keep anything that you need. But the Ben Ish Chai does not necessarily agree with this. The Ben Ish Chai goes with the simple understanding of the Shulchan Aruch that these are specific items, because going to take away from your kavanah. If they fall, they will be ruined, or something bad is going to happen. So therefore, if you have something small that's not important, if it falls, nothing happens, there's no prohibition against that. Would seem from the Chafetz Chai, from the Ben Ish Chai. So it's a little bit of machloket. L'chatchila, a person should certainly be machmir like the Kaf HaChaim if it's possible. מפני שליבו צריך עיון אם מותר לקח תפילין וספר תורה בידו אחד מתיירא מפני גנבים. How about if I have my tefillin, but I am in public place, right? I'm in an airport davening. And if I put my tefillin, it's $3,000 worth. So if I'm going to put my tefillin down, and someone is going to come and grab it, thinking that it's something very valuable for them, they don't know what the bags look fancy, right? This happens all the time. People break into cars. You shouldn't. There's more than one reason why you shouldn't leave your talit bag in the car, right? But one of them is because it looks very nice from the outside, and people think you have gold and diamonds and whatnot inside, and you break into your car, take the tefillin, and then you'll find your tefillin on sale on eBay. If not, sometimes you just find it on the street, or chas v'shalom in a trash can, which has been the case many, many times. Every year you have several times that you find. In last year, for those who remember, there was a Sefer Torah that was just thrown in the street. They had stolen it, thinking that he has all this silver and whatnot, and when they found out that the inside is just the parchment, they just throw it in the street. Chas v'shalom. Rahman, it's not, again, that you have to be. So what if I'm concerned about ganavim, that they may steal the tefillin? So I want to hold it I want to hold the Sefer Torah in my hand. I want to hold the tefillin in my hand because I want to protect them, right? So there says the Chafetz Chaim over here, the efshar de'yitiru lo, maybe, says the Pri Megadim, maybe that would be already mutar, because that's extenuating circumstances. And the Ben Ish Chai, for instance, says now two things. First of all, some people nowadays is a little bit better, but it used to be that, and it still is, sometimes your glasses are very loose, and they could very easily come off. And when you bow down, they may just drop. So says the Ben Ish Chai, if you're mishkafayim, or back in the day that they had this like fancy mishkafayim that doesn't have a handle, right? And it's just, you open it and you put it and it grabs onto the wall of the nose. So that also would be same thing, that if you bow and it's going to fall and break, especially back in the day that was actual glass, and now this could get scratched if it falls on the floor, and so on. So says the Ben Ish Chai, that would be the same thing in the first glance. They should be very careful to take them off before you start the tefillah, because you're concerned about it. You don't want it to fall and you don't want it to break. Now, this that we mentioned, maybe mutar, for them not to get stolen. The Kaf HaChaim writes that if you're not afraid of ganavim, if you're not afraid of thieves, and if you put them next to you, nothing is going to happen, then you could put them next to you and don't hold them in your hand, and because if you do it, then your mind is going to be on them, and it's going to be very difficult to have kavanah. This is only for when you're afraid of ganavim, because if you don't hold them, if you don't secure them, they're going to be bothering you more than if you hold them in your hand. So it's like better of the two evils. It's the same thing with the kid that's yelling and screaming. If you don't pick them up, it's going to be worse than if you pick them up. So here's the same thing. If you put them down next to you, if you're going to be more concerned and more afraid, and your mind is every second on what's going to happen now, so then that's not the tefillah. So you hold them in your hand and you try to be safe that it's not going to fall, and you daven your tefillah. Let's just finish this seif. Mutar le'echoz. It says you could hold it in your hand in seif Katan Zayin. The Mishnah Berura talks about. It's going back on the end of the seif, that if you have a lulav in its time, you're holding a trogan lulav in Chag HaSukkot, it's mutar because that is considered a mitzvah. So it says the Mishnah Berura, nafal sefer al haaretz ve'eno yachol lechavin. Let's imagine your sidur fell on the floor, and sitting on the floor. It's very difficult for you. There's a bizayon of a sidur, a sefer. You can't have kavanah davening like that. Mutar lak biho. Stop your davening, bend or whatever. If you have to step out of your place, pick it up, put it in its place, and then go back to your davening. That's what you should do. Mutar lak biho keshiyasem bracha. Finish the bracha that you are in. Go pick it up, put it back in a kiss, give it a kiss, put it back in the place, and go back to your tefillah. Ve'ilav achi lo yafsik. If not, you should not stop. In other words, if it doesn't bother you, if it doesn't, terminate your kavanah, then you don't have to stop your tefillah. V'chol shken she'en likrots be'esma b'chayotze b'sha'at tefillah im itchil להתפלל 18 ונתבלבל. So it says, kol shken, that you cannot, give sign language to other people. Someone could run a whole business deal with, saying I'll never forget in the certain shul, I was in a certain city, and the chazan standing there by the bima in Tefillat Shemona Esrei, he carried an entire conversation over the phone without talking. Imagine a shul that's quiet and people are davening, and the chazan by the bima picks up the phone. I must be pikuach nefesh. Let's give it the benefit of the doubt, but it must be pikuach nefesh. And that was the whole in front of the entire shul, full of people. So that if it was not pikuach nefesh, it's a tremendous chilul Hashem, and of course that's not right. But you can't even sign language to somebody what to do or what not to do. That's of course inappropriate as well. And says the Mishnah Berura, the last line over here. If you started davening and then you got distracted, mutar lelech lemakom hayadua lo likach misham sidur. You didn't have sidur. You didn't think you needed sidur, but now you can't daven b'kavanah. It's too much. The kids came in, whatever it is. You need now some focus, and you want to go to the shelf. You want to walk over to the shelf or to the next room, get a sidur, come back and continue your tefillah from a sidur. You could do that. That's totally fine. Mutar lelech lemakom hayadua lo likach misham sidur, and come back and daven properly. Now says the Kaf HaChaim that this heter that we mentioned is even if you already have been yotzei your yedei chovah, you have held your tefillin, you're davening musaf of Rosh Chodesh. You've davened already shachar. You took off your tefillin. You don't need to put on tefillin anymore. You still could have hold it in your hand if you're afraid that's going to be stolen. Yes.
About not speaking during the tefillah. I made a comment to somebody about it, and they said it's only the prohibition applies only to Sukkot Zimrat. What is that?
Was speaking during tefillah?
Yeah.
From the moment that you start Baruch Sha'amar until the end of Vidui, you cannot talk. That's clear in the Shulchan Aruch, black and white.
Just saying, and what about Mincha or
Mincha again is from the time that you start Shemona Esrei until the end of Vidui again. For Mincha. For Arvid is a shorter time, right? So, what's that? Arvid is for Baruch, right? But I'm saying after Tefillah you're done. After Shemona Esrei. So says the Kaf HaChaim says, how about if you want to hold your tzitzit, right? You hold your tzitzit in the Tefillah, is that mutar or asur? Well, first of all, if it drops, it doesn't fall anywhere necessarily. But even if it will fall on the floor, and because it's long and so on, still Kaf HaChaim says it's mutar. First of all, you don't. If you're holding it for that, you don't need to hold it for that because you could just tuck it under your belt or whatnot, and it will be fine. But if you're doing it because you want to hold it onto the tzitzit, says Kaf HaChaim it's mutar because it's like holding the mitzvah, right? The precious mitzvah of tzitzit is shakul k'neget kol mitzvot. That's something important, and therefore you're allowed to do that. And one more piece over here, the Mishnah Berura, if you remember, yes.
You're saying even though he holds at the Taz, you shouldn't hold anything anyway. Saying you can still hold your tzitzit.
Yeah, because it's like mitzvah, it's a lulav. Nobody argues with Mr. Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan says you can do lulav. So we mentioned that when Sidur fell, something distracts you, and you should finish the bracha and then go pick it up. On that, the Kaf HaChaim writes, and the Or LeTzion as well, says that nowadays we become very disturbed when a sefer falls, like something horrible. Baruch Hashem, it's a kavod that we have for Sfarim, and because it disturbs you immediately when it falls, and you can't even wait until the end of the bracha. Chacham and Sirah Shaul used to say that's mutar leharim be'emsa bracha. You could just pause where you are in tefillah, don't continue, go pick it up, put it back up, and then finish the bracha, because it's better to have the rest of the bracha with kavanah than your mind being completely fried and not be able to think because the sefer is on the floor. So that's the conclusion of Seif Aleph. Bezat Hashem will discuss amazing things about holding a sidur, which really nowadays used to be not as relevant. Now people who daven not in the shul, any minyan that you have at weddings, at shiva houses and so on and so forth, people do with the phone. You have a smart sidur, you have this. Is it mutar to hold the phone? Is it mutar to daven from a phone? Forget about holding a phone. Is it mutar to daven from a smartphone? Is it mutar to have a smartphone? That's a different conversation. But if you already have it, is it mutar to daven from it? There's something very interesting, which was Hashem we're going to discuss in the days to come.